like to call the Budget and Finance Committee a meeting of Thursday, January 9th, 2025, to open. Is there anything I need to say besides let's just go ahead and?
If you could do your roll call, please.
Okay, yes,
Thank you.
right.
I know you.
That's right. Okay, let's see, I guess. We can, so we're just going to say that there are just two of us here?
If you would just name off who's here and who's not.
Well, wait a minute, let me get the, okay, well, I guess Clyde Barnhill is not here. Jason Podge,
Present.
okay, and Patrick Baggett, not here. Okay, right, okay, so, but we will go through the agenda in that circumstance. Okay, let's see. Is there any? Are there any changes in the agenda, or we are just going to set the agenda as approve the agenda as submitted?
Recognizing that we do not have quorum to set the agenda, there are no modifications to the agenda at this time. For a point of order, recognizing that there is no agenda, we cannot vote on the agenda. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you very
Okay.
much. In that case, Madam Chair, I recommend that we move forward through our agenda today as properly documented and provided here to the public to move from setting the agenda, moving forward past the approval of the minutes, and then moving to new business as a review. And it will be documented but not voted upon.
Okay, documented then.
Would you mind just, I don't think there's probably any citizens here, but since we do have a citizen comment section, do you mind just asking if there are any before we move on to item number 3?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any citizens here who wish to be heard on any of the issues or concerns? Seeing none, then are we ready for the approval of the minutes? Can we vote on them or not?
No, ma'am, if you just skip right over that one, we'll go to number 3.
Okay.
That item could be presented, though.
Well, I have chaired, but not in this circumstance before. Okay. In number 3, we have consideration of resolution 2024-116, a resolution authorizing the city of Franklin, Tennessee to issue its general obligation bonds in the aggregate principal amount of not to exceed $48 million. And who will be speaking?
I'll introduce this item, Madam Chair, if that's okay. Actually, Resolutions 2024-116 and the next item,
Yes.
2024-117, are in tandem, and we have a single presentation for these two items that are both associated with issuing new general obligation bonds for the city of Franklin for new capital projects. And just as a little bit of background, this is the first time that the city is considering issuing general obligation bonds for new projects since the spring of 2019. It's been 6 years, almost 6 years, by the time we get to the point of actually closing the bond issue. So there's certainly we've had a lot has happened during that time period. The city does not typically issue debt for capital projects every year, so on an as-needed basis, but that's probably about the longest span of time. Certainly with Alderman Peterson in her career, that may have been the longest span of time that it has been. And when we talk about, we're going to have a debt service presentation here later in the agenda, and we'll talk about debt service obligations and a little bit more details on that. But we did want to back up, since it has been almost 6 years, and invite our bond professionals to come to this committee and walk through, both for our aldermen as well as citizens who may watch this presentation, the process for issuing general obligation bonds. And with that, I'm very pleased to have with us from Bass, Berry and Sims, our bond counsel, we have Lillian Blackshear. And she also has with her Bria Smith Edwards. I'd like to have Bria wave. also an attorney with Bass, Berry and Sims out of their Nashville office. And they serve as our bond counsel. And then we have our financial advisor from a PFM in Memphis. We have Lauren Lowe, and she has worked with the city for several years and assisting us with our financing needs and other questions that we have in between. So we're glad to have them here in person today. And with that, we're going to go through a fairly short presentation, and then we will have opportunity for questions that you may have. But certainly with a general obligation bond issue, it starts with the projects. And these are all projects that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen have heard about and you have acted upon. Two of these projects you've acted upon back in December, so they will certainly come to mind. But we do have 4 categories of projects in this bond issuance. And the first, I'm going to briefly talk through the first 2 categories, and then Michael is going to talk about the last 2 projects that the board approved action on in December. We do have fire apparatus in this bond issue. Certainly this board recalls that it takes us a long time from ordering fire apparatus for the apparatus to be received. And there were 3 pieces, I believe, were ordered about 4 years ago that were planned for this issuance. And one of them came in May of 2024. And then we have one that our fire department's going to be taking possession of next week. And so that's been about a 4-year process. And there is still one more in that grouping that's within this bond issue. So we will be able to have reimbursement for 2 of those 3 fire apparatus. The board will recall that, or the alderman will certainly recall that we asked for permission to order 3 more pieces of replacement apparatus by 12/31/24. That 3-year clock has just started, and we'll include those in the next bond issue. So these are 3 pieces that were ordered several years ago. And then the next category is major road resurfacing, and this is a program that our streets department manages. And in this program, we're able to do more for our street improvements than we can do with the gas tax monies that come in. And we started this specific program with bond issues back in 2017, continued that with the 2019 bond issue, and there has been additional road improvements that have been done through this program every year since then. We actually, for 2023 and 2024, have completed those programs, and this bond issue includes reimbursements that would be allowable from 2023 and 2024, and then also programs funds for 2025. And that program has really allowed us to keep these major streets in really good shape and continue to do that on an annual basis. And so, Michael, if you'll start with Southeast Park.
Good afternoon, the few, the proud, the mighty of the Budget and Finance Committee. Michael Walters-Young, your Chief Budget and Performance Officer. The 2 final aspects of this bond issue are $30 million for the estimated $64.8 million project cost of Southeast Park Phase 1. To date, $12 million has already been spent on this project. That's primarily the bridge at Southeast. This $30 million would be approximately 30 of $35 million that we would look at borrowing for. The second tranche of money for this we look at in a later bond issuance, quite possibly as early as next year. There will be an issuance needed for a small project called City Hall coming up, but that's not this year and in front of you. McEwen Phase 4 was also awarded on the same day. That has an estimated project cost at this point in time of $55.4 million all in, of which $30 million is going to be paid for by federal and state grants. The $5 million is to be used for sort of this initial work on it, the utility relocation and costs early in construction. As we are able to get underway, of course, the federal grants work as a reimbursement, so we'll spend the money first, be able to submit for their portion back to us. We are estimating approximately $14 million of that total 55 coming from road impact fees. And so the balance is cash and some additional utility amounts. And a little bit of foreshadowing for you all. Tuesday night, you will be receiving an update to the financial model for the CIP for the next 10 years, of which these two projects will be in, along with many others.
And Michael noted this, at your meeting in December, you awarded the bid for both Southeast Park and McEwen, both right around $46 million each as those move forward. Related to McEwen, we have just a little bit over $30 million of federal funds in it, but we're continuing to pursue some additional federal dollars as well. So we hope within the year to get some news on that could add to that. And once you've gotten into the federal program, you've met those requirements, you've checked those boxes, if you will, it's a great opportunity to get some additional dollars added on. We saw that happen late last year with the bridge at Harlansdale. We got an additional $1 million late in that project because the state didn't want to give it back, and we had a project that had already met all the requirements, and it was a nice benefit to us, and we hope to capitalize on that with McEwen as well. So these are good projects moving forward, ones we've talked about for many years, and glad to see them happening, and the bond issuance helps us get that across the goal line.
So with this overview of the bond projects, we're going to now turn the presentation over to Lily and Lauren to walk through issuance of the 2025 GO bonds.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. Good to see you both. Lily and I will dovetail together and work on this presentation, and certainly stop us if you have questions or things that need clarification. So on this slide, we've really walked through the competitive bond sale process, and it's intended to be a timeline or sequencing of events, but without any dates associated with it. So we're really at the very first point of a financing schedule in which the initial and authorizing resolutions that were referenced earlier in the agenda would be presented to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Assuming those are approved, the initial resolution would then be later published in the newspaper. Bond structuring really is on the shoulders of PFM, but we work very closely with Christine and the finance team to evaluate market conditions, interest rates, and really how do you want to repay the debt. I will also flag that we've done some of that to prepare for this presentation and to be able to answer any questions you may have, and we will do it throughout the entire process because, as we know, market conditions don't stay stagnant. They do change over time. So we want to make sure we have flexibility built into the documents, but also we're continuing to monitor and keeping the city abreast of changes. We will seek credit ratings. Those are credit ratings of the city's general obligation credit. Will be 2 credit ratings. We will start that process by giving them the documents that we refer to as the initial resolution, the authorizing resolution, all financial information for the city, estimated debt service numbers, and they will then start about a 2 to 3 week process in which there is a back and forth with Q&A, and we do schedule conference calls with key stakeholders within city leadership to talk with the rating agencies. As we're working through that, we're also preparing those 2 documents that I referred to earlier that will go to the rating agencies. Those are referred to offering documents for the preliminary official statement and the notice of sale. These are really intended to summarize not only key elements of the transaction, but also historical information, financial and economic and demographic of the city of Franklin. Since you haven't been in the market and investors really haven't looked at you at this level of detail, it will give a fresh update to them for them to make credit decisions in terms of investing in the city of Franklin. Those documents really get started earlier, but we don't finalize them until we have our credit ratings, in which that's the last piece of information that goes into those documents. Then they were released to the market, and we start a marketing process. It's about a 1-week period, give or take a few days, in which potential underwriters and investors can look at this information and seek any clarifications, be it to us or Bass Berry or to the city. Then we have the bond pricing process, which is a competitive public offering per state law. We receive competitive bids through an electronic platform, and we award based on the lowest true interest cost or interest rates, if you will, and that is verified by PFM before we provide award. After we have selected the winning competitive underwriter, we will complete all the offering documents and closing documents, and we close, a few weeks later, and we'll talk a little bit more about that schedule. So that's sort of start to finish. There's probably more in there, but this is the key elements that sort of make a transaction start to finish and click all throughout the way, about 3-month process. On the next page, oh, thank you. We've provided here the key players to ensure that this transaction occurs. You have, we noted here today, bond counsel, which is Bass, Berry & Sims, the financial advisor to the city, PFM, the paying agent, which will be U.S. Bank, and they have historically provided those services to the city. The underwriter would be determined through a competitive public sale per state law, and then the two rating agencies that the city is rated by is Moody's and S&P. And I'll turn it over to Lillian for slide 5.
Thanks, Lauren. So slide 5, we talk about the general obligation pledge. So the security and source of repayment for these bonds will be a full faith and credit pledge of the city. That is the strongest pledge a local government can make to repay its debt. You are essentially pledging the unlimited taxing power, property taxing power of the city to repay your debt. Obviously, Franklin has a very strong GEO credit rating, AAA. Can't get any better than that. So we expect that will obviously help Franklin as it goes to the market. But one thing about the general obligation pledge that everyone understands in the investor market, but sometimes your typical citizen may not understand, is that when you have a general obligation pledge, you are bound to repay that debt. And if you do not repay the debt, the bondholders have a right to sue to enforce their payment of the debt. Obviously, the city of Franklin has no problems paying its debt, but the general obligation pledge will be the pledge that's used to repay these bonds.
And I'll talk a little bit about the tax status, which really drives the cost of the financing. The tax status is based on the nature of the projects. How are you going to spend those dollars? And it really comes down to bond counsel looking at what are the projects and the use of those projects, and are you going to spend the dollars quickly? Everything we've seen is these are governmental bonds and they're eligible for tax exempt interest rates. The benefits, as you all know, is that tax exempt interest rates traditionally are lower than taxable interest rates. For proximity, it's about 70% lower. Obviously, that's based on market conditions. And the reason why it's beneficial to you all is that the bondholders ultimately get that tax break, and it's included in gross income, not included in gross income for the federal tax purposes. So we have seen that to be a value that the city of Franklin has used its general obligation debt to secure tax exempt financing. The graphic here gives you a comparison looking over the last 3 years. We have seen obviously significant market movement where if interest rates have increased. However, the tax exempt interest rate market is still favorable. We've given you a snapshot here comparing the 10-year treasury rate to a 10-year tax exempt index. This is the Bloomberg tax exempt interest rate, a 10-year reference point. So when we pulled this in mid-December to prepare for this presentation, the 10-year treasury was a 440 comparative to that 10-year tax exempt index at a 295. So you can see that the value between tax exempt and taxable, the value that tax exempt interest rates bring comparative to a taxable interest rate. I'll turn it over to Lillian for the authorizing resolution components of that.
These are the most exciting documents that will ever come across your desk. The bond resolutions. So as Christine noted at the outset, we'll be showing 2 resolutions. So the way that the Tennessee Code works is that there will be an initial resolution, which will be a very short one-pager. I think that was the resolution numbered 116. And that will have the 4 major components of the deal in there. So the not to exceed par amount, which will be $48 million. We'll have the projects listed, which would be parks, roads, public safety equipment. It will have the credit, which will be the general obligation pledge that we just discussed. And then you will have that resolution and it will be published in the newspaper. And then you would obviously have a right to protest. The second resolution that will come before you is the bond resolution, which is the one that has the detailed terms of the bonds. So if you look at your slide, you can see all the pieces of the bond issue that will be included in that detailed bond resolution. The statutes that govern the issuance of this debt will be Title IX, Chapter 21 under the Tennessee Code. You have the projects to be financed, which we just talked about, roads, parks, and public safety equipment. The not to exceed par amount, meaning you cannot issue any bonds that exceed $48 million. You would have the payment dates for the bonds. So you would be obligated to repay the principal amount of the bonds annually, and the interest on the bonds would be payable semi-annually. So we are tentatively planning for an annual principal payment date of March and semi-annual payments of March and September. You would then also include in there a tentative redemption date. This can change at the time of sale. So to the extent that there are some market conditions that would indicate that a better redemption date could be found to have a better interest rate for the city, that could be changed. But typically you would have a 10-year call date. So at 10 years post-issuance, those bonds could be called in if they could be refunded at a better interest rate. And then obviously, as we noted, you'd have your general obligation pledge noted in your resolution, which would be the general full obligation, full faith and credit, and your limited ad valorem taxing power.
On slide 8, we've provided a little bit of a market update, and you will note that this is actually the U.S. Treasury market. And the reason why we have chosen to give that as a market update and a forecast is really that's the most prevailing information is the forecasted Treasury market comparative to, there's some markets that predict the tax exempt market, but really they're so tethered to the Treasury market. We felt like this was a better baseline for consideration. There's been a lot of questions around what we think is going to happen in the interest rate market for 2025. We do recognize we have a market potential mover with the inauguration in January. The financing schedule, which I'll go through later, really puts us farther beyond that to really let the market die down. And if there is any kind of volatility, we've sort of absorbed it, recognized it, and planned accordingly. We do not, based on the projections, we actually do not think it's going to be, if there was a movement, it would probably be a couple of days of a blip and we return back to normal. You'll see these projections where it shows the Treasury market. And if you recall on previous slides, the tax exempt market really does move in tandem with the taxable market or the Treasury market. We see that they're projecting that we see a slight decline in interest rates throughout the calendar year 2025 and 26, but not material declines and certainly not reverting back to where interest rates were in 2020 and 21. So we sort of feel like the plan as we see it for timeline is looking to hit the financing, completing it by Q1, and it may slide into Q2 if there is a market consideration that we would evaluate and make that recommendation. But the market appears to be moving in the right direction with no material movements expected one way or the other. On the next slide, this is where we've started to structure the repayment terms and of the projects associated with this financing. So we've provided some estimated information based on the market conditions when we prepared this in mid-December. We estimate the actual amount borrowed, so the par amount as we refer to it in the municipal finance world, is a $43 million to $46 million, really dependent on how the tax exempt interest rates shake out comparative to the coupon rate. You'll note that that is lower than the actual project amount, and that is specific to the tax exempt interest rate market, and that investors will often purchase the city's debt at a 5% coupon but a lower actual yield, in which they're paying more than $1 a day to get $1 in the future, and that results in an original issue premium. So you actually borrow less than what you need to. You borrow less than the $48 million that we've estimated the project cost, but you still have a sufficient dollars with those original issue premium to fund the total project cost. We've given you a range here based on market conditions as we think about moving into Q1 of 2025, as well as an estimated true interest cost range of a $375 to a $425, which we do believe is fair and respectful of the AAA rating of the city. That results in debt service payments that we've estimated here. We started in FY 2026 through 35 of $4 million, and they're going to decline here, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. From 2036 to 2040 of approximately $2.9 million, and 2041 through 45 of approximately $2.6 million. That is intentional because we structured the repayment terms to coincide with the projects being financed. So the fire apparatus is being structured over a 15-year term. The major road resurfacing is 10 years, whereas the new park construction and road improvements are over 20 years. And that's really being respectful of their average life and factoring that in. Now, it is one bond issue, but you will see that they're expected to be declining debt service payments over time.
That park's going to be there a lot longer than 20 years.
It will be. It will be. It is. That is correct. So the next slide is a projected timeline. I think we feel certain about the first few dates, and then we'll revisit as market conditions continue to shake out and we get on everyone's calendar. Obviously, we're here today to present to you all this presentation. It is my understanding that the work session will be on January 28th, in which the initial and authorizing resolutions will be discussed to be considered at the February 11th Board of Mayor and Alderman meeting. We have identified, once we get past that point, we would engage and have discussions with the rating agencies the second half of February. And then we would be looking to obtain their rating shortly thereafter and put the offering documents, which are that preliminary official statement and notice of sale, to the market in early March, and price and close in March of 2025. I will say that we will watch market conditions. If we need to move things a day here or there, we certainly will coordinate very closely with the city and bond council to make that recommendation. But I think the intent is to get in and be closed either in Q1 or very shortly into Q2. And we're happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions?
Madam Chair, I don't have any questions at this time.
And is this really both 3 and 4 together, or I know there's some difference, but
It is, both the 116, resolutions 116 and 117 are encompassed in the presentation.
Right,
So we would be taking those together to the BOMA work session at the end of January for discussion.
I actually do have a question.
okay.
And this is a little bit broader, and Eric, you may need to weigh in as well. But I know that as we have contemplated the changes with TDOT and their project processing now, and we have talked about other infrastructure improvements around the city. And I know that those conversations are taking place outside of this meeting. Would that process follow a similar route if the city needed to have a project like a Mac Hatcher, whether it's southeastern or northeastern? Would it follow a similar route? Is there any benefit to that being done in the next few years as far as the bonds? And I just putting that out there because I know that these are questions that come up every once in a while, and we're talking about 4 significant projects right now, and
Well,
just put that out there.
Well, Christine and I will team up on this one.
Yeah, please.
You know, should we be in some sort of partnership arrangement to improve, say, a segment of Mac Hatcher? We've looked into the ability to use general obligation debt as an option to help fund our portion. You wouldn't do that, though, till you had that clear understanding and agreement with the state, and also understand the timing of that. So this would likely, should we be in that position to partner and work on that project together, this would certainly be one of the tools that the city might use in funding our portion of that partnership. But we would want to know timing and amounts, et cetera, to structure it appropriately. You know, we have a window of time that we need to spend and use the proceeds to deliver the project. So you'd need to factor all that in. We don't have those details or that agreement at this stage, but this certainly, you would go through a process like this to get there once we know those answers and kind of understand when we would need to have the resources in place to help meet our obligations. So.
Well, I agree completely with Eric. What Eric is sharing is that something that we work as staff with our project managers is the timing of those expenditures. And we've been working, for example, certainly we've been working on this bond issue and these projects for several years now. And they've been on our capital program, but they had not been to the point where the project managers could say, these funds will be spent in the next 36 months. And that's where we are now with Southeast Park. That's where we certainly are with McEwen, and the board's actions in December allowed the project managers to have a confidence and assurance that we would be able to spend those funds in accordance with the federal government's requirements for tax exempt debt. If the debt wasn't tax exempt, we wouldn't have rules on how quickly we have to spend it. But that's something that the tax exemption is certainly worth having. but we are careful to issue when we have assurances that those funds will be spent, and primarily spent within 36 months. And there's even some milestones within the 36 months, but at the simplest levels, we do need to have assurances that those funds will be spent and those projects will be moved forward very quickly.
Okay, good. And that answers the question, is that this is a viable tool that we could be using here in the future, and there's a lot of benefits.
Yes, it's just been that we haven't had projects to this point in several years. Before this last bond issue, we actually did a general obligation debt within 2 years of one another. We did 17 and 19 in pretty quick order.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions or your comments, either one? Right. Thank you very much. And so then we're looking at item 5, which is the budget presentation of the fiscal year 2026 budget.
All right, well, committee, we are kicking off our budget process in earnest now. And one of the places we start with is how big we think that pie is going to be, what the revenues look like. And Dylan will get to present that to you. That's one of the things we always assign the management fellow working with Michael and our team to do. So he'll give you those details in a little bit. But we're going to walk through for you those components and really kick this process off, describe where the process is going. And so we'll walk through that for you just a little bit here today. Let's go ahead to the next piece. Your budget is really putting policy and vision into action. And so it's how we spend our money, it's how we deliver our services, but it also charts our course in terms of where we're going as an organization. We do focus in on best practices and how we present our budget, how we develop it. And you'll see that budget should be a policy document, but also a financial plan, guides our operations, and communicates and sends a message out to our community about what we're focusing on as top priorities for the community. You see these 3 pillars. It's very appropriate that we talk today about a bond issue and bond ratings, because these 3 kind of pillars were developed when we went in 2009 to get our second AAA bond rating. We went to New York and presented the bond rating agencies there, and we talked about these 3 components being really the bedrock of Franklin and of a strong, solid performance. And that is that we manage our operations well. We're driven by best practices, that we have strong community development, that we are a high quality, highly competitive community that is focusing on a vibrant local economy and a strong local economy as well. And that all of it comes back down to a strong financial base. We've got good long-term financial plans in place. We look at the viability of what we do from an operations and capital support side, and that AAA bond rating really exemplifies being that very best, most solid performing local government that we can be. And that is a statement both about how your local government operates specifically, but also the economic trajectory of your community. And we want to reflect that in how we build and support the community and how we operate as a local government, as a service provider to the community. So we're on this journey now. And we have a schedule here coming up with, I think, the next slide. We'll have the board adopt budget goals at the meeting on Tuesday. You got to pass those on in December when you met. And for the next 3 months, you'll get to see each of the departments come in and present to you what is important to them, how they're serving, and what the next chapters look like. And then in April, we'll process together all the different program enhancements that have been requested and get some sense of priorities from the board. And then the 1st of May, early part of May, I'll present to you a recommended budget. And then you'll use the rest of May and June to make those final decisions and approve that budget through the 3 required readings and the public hearing. And then July 1, we'll start with a brand-new budget to get us going. So this is the process that you're really hitting the heart of it, where we talk about what departments are doing and what they see as opportunities moving forward. And all of that comes back to the revenue base that we have, the ability to pay for those services and the enhancements that we'd like to bring to the community. And revenue is the place that we start. And so we give that at least that best estimate, best picture that we have at this stage, and continue to refine it as we look at those plans and those opportunities, and ultimately the budget plan we bring forward and that I recommend to you in May. Michael?
So before we turn it over and talk revenues, a couple of housekeeping items. The first is there's a series of changes that you will see within departmental budgets in an attempt to streamline financial planning and financial processing. Historically, we have divided property and liability amounts and put them in each and every single cost center. Because of how we bid insurance on an annual basis, there is great difference on how much goes into an umbrella versus what might be vehicle versus what might be property. And so those variances in departments can vary greatly. We are not going to do that anymore. Instead, we're going to budget property and liability insurance in the general expense category of the general fund, water, sewer, stormwater, and sanitation. So that way, those budgets, when they're presented to you for purely operations, will be more uniform. The second is utilities for general fund operations, for the fire stations, the police station, for electric, gas, water, internet, sanitation, by and large, will be reflected within the project and facilities management budget. Currently, those have still been, in some cases, in fire or police or parks. The purchasing office cost center will not be presented as a separate budget. It is now part of the finance department. And the FY25 financials will not change. Okay, that budget still is there and that account code. But what you'll see in 26 is that the finance department will be significantly larger by several $100,000 as a result of the purchasing function being within the finance department. We have standard inflation calculated at 3% throughout budgets and 2% in the out years. And then the standard assumptions we have carried out in budgets in the past, amounts and budgeted set aside for wages, health insurance, those increases that we've done, we're building those budgets accordingly. The city administrator may want to make one mention about wages.
Yes, we talked a little bit about this in the budget goals, but we will be doing a comprehensive review of our pay plan. We try to do that in a 3-year cycle. Of course, COVID knocked us off of that. When we last did it, and that ended up being a 5-year because of the timing of that. But we're on our regular 3-year cycle. You may remember we did some things specifically related to public safety in this budget. So we've really done a significant chunk of that with about half of our team already. We will still update that and look at that in public safety, but then the remainder of our operations, we will compare that, look at our market position. One of the things we talked about is we focused on the 80th percentile in previous compensation plans. We will look at that again, but we'll also look at what it takes to get to the 90th percentile, which is what we targeted in public safety as well. So we will be looking at both of those. I don't know how that will lay out, but we've already started that process, started it really July, August with updates of all the job descriptions. Our consultant has been looking at that and will be circling back with each department here probably around February timeframe. And then in this process, we will have a recommendation of modifications that will be recommended to the overall compensation plan to maintain and build on our competitive position to attract and retain the best talent for our team. So that is a big undertaking. It's an important one, but I'm really glad that we are back on the normal cycle, that we can stay on top of that and make sure we're doing the best we can with that. Of course, it's always counterbalanced with what's our capacity to pay for those changes. And there have been in the past times where we've needed to phase in over time. We will look at all those and give you our best estimate, best recommendation on how to implement the plan and keep us in a good, strong, competitive position.
So before I turn it over to Dylan to do the revenue model, I get to play economist for a few minutes in front of you. We want to set the stage. You've heard a little bit about that in terms of where treasuries are from Lauren and Lillian. But let's take a step back. The last 5 years have been quite a study in contrast. You had the greatest economic contraction and restoration within 2 quarters that you've ever seen in your lifetimes in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. 2021, we were getting out of the limitations of the pandemic, but there were all sorts of interesting things going on between supply chain shortages, between $4 and $5 billion of government stimulus put into the economy in a 2-year time span, and the dramatic changes in worker availability and productivity as the result of what occurred in the pandemic, and still trying to figure out exactly how that looks and how that functions across industries today. In 2022, you got hit with the highest inflation that we had seen since the first term of the Reagan administration. In 2023, that inflation remained stubbornly strong, but started to recede. Yet, month after month, no loss in available jobs, and in fact, growth in jobs. I'll touch on that in a second. And then in 2024, inflation still was going down. We'll show that chart in a moment. But there are certainly some specific industry challenges, but yet overall the numbers, the metrics, the health of the national and certainly local economy is still incredibly strong. On the screen, you have unemployment numbers for the last 24 months between November 22, 23, and 24 for the nation, the state, the Nashville MSA, Williamson County, and the city of Franklin. And what you see is really not a statistical change. Slightly lower in 2022, slightly higher in 2024, but a nationwide unemployment rate of only 4% in November. And again, virtually full employment here in Franklin and Williamson County over that time is an indication of remarkably strong local and national economies, despite all of the uncertainty that I have and will speak on. As of November 30th, there are still 7.4 million jobs available. As a year ago, when I did this presentation in front of you, there are 8.8 million jobs available. In November, we added 227,000 new jobs nationally, marking the 47th consecutive month on record that the economy added jobs. That is the third longest streak in the history of record keeping in this country. The Federal Reserve certainly continues to focus most of its efforts on fighting inflation. And on the chart on the screen, the yellow line is the central federal funds rate, or gold. The brown line is inflation. This is over the last 25 years. You can see how inflation at one point during the Great Recession contracted, but otherwise has been small amounts. And for the vast majority of the last 25 years, except for the last 2 to 3, was within that 2 to 3% range, which is why the federal funds rate was 2 to 3% or lower, and why, when we looked at wage increases on an annual basis, you kind of had comfort that you could start and do 2.5 for a COLA, and if inflation was 2, you were meeting that, and that's not been the case in the last several years. The benchmark federal funds rate at the moment for lending is 4.5%. That's the green dot. Their target, of course, is that big red dot at 2%. That's probably not going to be achieved in the short term. The inflation rate is down from a high in 2022 of almost 9% to 2.7% as of the month of November. Consumer spending is the largest single component of our gross domestic product. It makes up 68%. Last year at this time, it was 70%. So it is dropping ever so slightly if you compare year over year. But a loss of 2% in consumer spending, given the significant inflation we've had, is still rather remarkable. One of the other metrics that economists look at is how many people are actively seeking employment versus the jobs available. And there's still a gap of about 2 million between those who are actively seeking and the jobs that are out there. The state does a lot of time looking at workforce participation rates and seeing how many are still, quote unquote, on the sidelines. from 10 to 15 years ago, you had a workforce participation rate in the state of Tennessee of 65% of the population. Today, that is 60. So there is still, in analysis and in economists' minds, millions of people who are still sitting on the sidelines who could come into the workforce under the right conditions if they were motivated, if they had the training, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, markets ended 2024 at near all-time highs. The Dow Jones average was up roughly 12% year over year. So where are we going? Inflationary pressures definitely remain, but continue to get a little bit better. I am not an economist, so I'm not going to pontificate on the phrase soft landing. I think we're better than the worst case scenario we thought could have happened anytime over the last 5 years, and things are relatively strong. There is a degree of uncertainty with the next administration and domestic policy changes. But it is that phrase. The markets have baked in a lot of that uncertainty. We don't know how much federal spending may be curtailed. That is a topic in Washington, D.C. We also don't know if, where, and how, and when tariffs could be applied to certain industries. Not being my father, I'm not going to pontificate, though he wrote a thesis on the Wilson-Gorman tariff of 1894. Interestingly enough, that reduced tariff rates and implemented the first income tax in U.S. history. We still have global instability. Ukraine and Israel, the fights are still going on in those areas. There will continue to be regional disruptions to those supply chains. But again, the markets seem to have baked that uncertainty into short-term and long-term prospects. State of Tennessee. It's important to note as we look into the short, mid, and long term that net migration is the factor that continues to increase the state's population, but that the birth rate is slowing. There are very large construction projects in various regions of this country, certainly Blue Oval and the Ford's electronic battery plant in West Tennessee, the new Nissan Stadium project in downtown, although it's more than one opening the Tennessee Titans have at the moment, is going to contribute to certainly the local economy. And there's a new uranium enrichment facility being built in Oak Ridge. So you've got very strong growth in construction throughout the state of Tennessee. Other industries that are important to the state, healthcare, farming, manufacturing, remain relatively strong. But the automobile industry, which is very vital to the state of Tennessee, is changing and is more uncertain than it has in quite some time with the advent of electronic vehicles. Vice Mayor Potts and I are part of Leadership Franklin this year. Excuse me, we had a chance to go to Nissan yesterday. That is something that they're very mindful of, the electronic vehicle market, but it's going to be something worth watching. Finally, the local economy, all these metrics and numbers, I think that you've seen, remains in very good shape. But as we talked about yesterday and what we heard yesterday was workforce development, access to skilled labor, and being able to afford places where workers can live are probably the three most important factors that are of the concern on industry locally, whether they be international corporations or small businesses in the Galleria. And those are just factors that we all have to keep in mind as we live, work, and play here in Franklin. All of that being said, our revenues are still quite stable. You have 15 funds for which budgets are approved annually. We present low, medium, and high values. Dylan will be referencing the medium values. Our preliminary revenue assessment is based on projections from the Tennessee State Funding Board in the months of November and December, historical performance, and economic trends. And as always, our model in January is conservative. Future forecasts will continue to be refined. Without ado, Mr. Gaster.
Thank you, Dylan Gaster, your management fellow. So before you, you have the summary of all funds that we are forecasting for fiscal year 2026. As you can see, the total for 2026 is $229.1 million. which is a decrease of 2.5% from what we budgeted in fiscal year 2025. This decrease is largely due to the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, which those funds were received and expensed in the budget for fiscal year 25, and so we're not expecting those funds to reoccur in fiscal year 26. And this touches a couple of different funds, as we'll see later on in the presentation. So that's just something to keep in mind why the decrease looks so major. It's that one big funding stream. So our largest fund remains the general fund at 49.1%, and the smallest fund is the drug fund with 0.1%. So going into the general fund, we see a 0.3% decrease from 2025, going down from 112.9 to 112.5. We only have 4 months of actuals for fiscal year 24. And so that's how this was forecast, and we remained conservative in the process. Local sales tax makes up the majority of the general fund with 59.3%. Looking by source, consumption makes up the majority of the general fund by 80%, followed by wealth and assets, fees and permits, and then the other category of the general fund. Taking a closer look here at local sales tax, looking budget to budget, for fiscal year 26, we're forecasting 66.7 million as opposed to 63.8 million in fiscal year 25. Considering the actuals that we have collected so far and the budget amendment that went before the board, modifying the budget to include the actuals that we recorded in the first 2 months, the fiscal year 25 estimate is 64.9 million. So the difference between budget 25 and 26 is 4.6%, or almost 3 million, as you see there. But comparing it to our estimate for 25, it's only a 2.74% increase. So this is, like I said, based on only 4 months of actuals, so there's still a lot of months to go to kind of refine this. And so as we get further into the budget process and later on in the spring, we'll have more actuals and be able to lock in our forecast a little bit better. So a little bit on how we got to the 2.74% increase forecast that you were shown on the last slide. For the past 25 years, just over a 4.5% increase in sales tax has been recorded. For fiscal year 24, which is our last complete fiscal year of actuals, there was an increase of 3.1% from fiscal year 2023. So this is due to steady growth and higher than anticipated collections. For the past 10 years, it's been 4.8% year over year collection average increase. So the State Funding Board, which is made up of 4 separate projections, shows anywhere from 3% to 6% increase in sales tax. So our estimate of 2.74 is below the lowest estimate that the State Funding Board showed for sales tax. So we remain conservative, even though the sales tax looks a little bit high coming from the State Funding Board this year. Going into the state shared category of the general fund, an increase of $382,428, bringing it to a forecast of 18.1 million in fiscal year 26, over the 17.7 million estimate for 2025. So the year-to-date collections that are coming in so far in fiscal year 25 are over that which was budgeted. And so worked into our forecast for 2026, we project about a 2.5% growth based on the State Funding Board, which is made up of the University of Tennessee, ETSU, Department of Revenue, and the Fiscal Review Committee. So for the table that you see on the screen, it is taken into account their projections. We looked at the lowest projection, the highest, and the average of all 4 projections. And then we also took into account our historicals, so from the past 5 up to the past 25 years, what the trends were doing, and that's how we came to those percentages.
This is the category you would see if we are able to update our census numbers. You'd see some additional revenue. We're not assuming that at this stage.
Right.
Unfortunately, we've only gotten about half the number that we think we're at in terms of collecting that information from our residents. So we'll continue to push that, but that time is running short on our ability to get that number validated and get it into the state so that it could hit in this budget year. But we'll keep working at it. But we have not assumed additional revenue from that source in this number at this time.
And that was one of the things we really were hoping for on the census, was to get the additional state money.
Yeah,
Yes,
that could
ma'am.
be a significant number. That could be around $1 million a year, actually, if that number is where we think it should be. So
And
it's
every
just where we are, but we're not assuming it.
Right, and every category that you see in that chart there, MTAS has a breakdown of per capita, how much per person could be expected to receive. So that played a role in this consideration, but those census numbers are very vital because the more people we have, the per capita amount goes up. So. Next up, in property tax. In fiscal year '26, we're forecasting 25.1 million, as opposed to fiscal year '25's budget of 24.3 million. So this is an increase of 3%. The net general fund property tax, this is when the monies that go to debt service and street aid interfund transfers are taken out. So the net estimates for '26 is 10.1 million. In '25, it was 12.6 million. This is a decrease of 19.38%. So this large decrease you see here is due to higher debt service costs assumed as a result of the upcoming GO bond issue that you just heard about.
Let me say a couple of things to add on to that. Number one, we pay our general obligation bonds, we service that debt with property tax first. And so we are carrying that practice here. And so this revenue model and the debt service fund budget that Christine will present next assume a certain amount of annual debt service based upon the presentation that you just saw. And so we will reduce the amount of available revenue to the general fund by the commensurate amount. However, we will also be reducing by a commensurate amount the amount of transfer to the capital projects fund. So we've been taking, and I'll go back through this with the debt capacity model when I present the financial model to you for the CIP on Tuesday night. But what we do and what we've assumed is that we have taken 50% of the increase in sales tax from effective 2018, started hitting our books in fiscal 21, so April of 21, that when we went from 9.25% to 9.75% here in Franklin, we have been taking half of that, 50%, and depositing it in the capital projects fund. So that's been building your general fund cash. Well, you can finance capital through a variety of ways. That cash is going to be used to service the debt. So there will be no impact to general fund operations. We will simply not put as much aside in cash to capital. The second is this assessment does not take into account anything with revaluation or reappraisal.
Right, and that is coming this year.
That is coming this year. Now, that is because from a financial standpoint, we cannot assume a cent more of property tax collected just because your values go up. I don't know if we want to make any mention of any estimates on timelines. We just anticipate that it will be still very close and even slightly after, maybe, it certainly was that last time, for when you will see the budget in terms of a new set of values and property tax rate.
So reappraisal always presents an opportunity for us to step back and look at what our rate is and how we want to use property tax revenue as part of our overall strategy and our overall structure. So that will be something we'll be looking at. The last cycle, we didn't make any changes. We had the rate go down. The cycle before that, we held the rate, and it has been really the backbone of funding our 10-year capital program. It has really given us some additional capacity to do projects. And I think as we look at the various needs, that's at least something we need to have a discussion about. And so that'll be part of, as we talk on Tuesday about the capital project financial model and where we are and some of the other things, opportunities that are out there. That'll just be something as we develop this budget that we will be thinking about and what that looks like. And yes, we don't get those numbers till much later in the process, but we do know enough to make at least some educated estimates and have something that we could work against to give you a sense of what that capacity could be at, if the rate goes down, what that might be, what your opportunities might be per penny beyond that, and at least give you the information to make an informed decision. So that will be an added wrinkle to this budget process that has implications for both operations and our capacity for capital investment, the 10-year capital investment program.
So next up under the general fund is building permits and licenses. So in fiscal year 26, the forecast is 2.45 million versus the 25 estimate of 2.48 million. So this is a decrease of 1.3% due to these revenues being highly dependent on the development activity in the community. So the budget is slightly lower than the expected fiscal year 25, which just off 4 months of actuals is looking a little bit slower, but we can continue to monitor and update estimates accordingly. Next up, we have interest income. So under interest in fiscal year 26, 2.6 million. The fiscal year 25 estimate is 3.56 million. So this is a decrease of $949,465 or 27%. So the interest rates were increased from 22 to 23, but the city has been able to lock in higher rates on investments. We're expecting lower but still healthy returns for both 25 and 26, and this chart here doesn't include the interest on investments. So as you can see in the chart, it's been very volatile over the past 5 years. So this forecast we've made is still more positive than the past 4 of the 5 years of actuals that we've got in. Moving out of the general fund now into the sanitation fund in fiscal year 26, our forecast is 13.1 million. The estimate for the remainder of fiscal year 2025 is 11.9 million. So this fund sees an increase of $1,142,872 or 10%. So this forecast we have in front of you includes the rate increase that you approved and went into effect January 1st of this year. For the development-related funds, it is in your packets, has a breakdown of everything there. They include road impact, city facilities, county facilities, and parkland dedication. All of these funds are heavily dependent on the timing of new development and when those revenues actually come in, and we can record them as actuals, but these forecasts could increase or decrease. So for this initial forecast, we're forecasting 75 to 85% of the last 5-year averages, dependent on the trends that appeared in each individual fund. So this gets us an idea, but since they're dependent on development, how those numbers go will change with time. In the Hotel Motel Tax Fund, in fiscal year 2026, we're forecasting 6.69 million. The fiscal year 2025 estimate is 7.7 million. So this decrease of just over $1 million or 14% is a good example of the ARPA funds that I talked about earlier. So those are not in the 26 forecast because they were only expected in fiscal year 25. Also, in terms of actual tax collections, this forecast was a little more conservative than we usually do because the 3 months that were recorded so far in 25 were a little bit lower than expected. So we adjusted this in the forecast, but this is one fund that we'll keep a close eye on as we continue, and we'll refine the numbers as we get into the spring. And finally, we have the Water Sewer Fund. So in fiscal year 26, the forecast is 50.8 million. 25 estimate, 49.8 million. So this is an increase of just over $1 million or 2%. So the fiscal year 26 forecasts include the currently approved customer service and impact fee rates for both water and sewer fees. And Michael, I think you had a comment on this as well.
Let me just say, also at your meeting on the 14th, you will have an update of the water and sewer cost of service study. So this model is conservative and takes into account an anticipated 3% in water and 2% in sewer. You're going to see different information on Tuesday night regarding the needs of those funds. So this is our placeholder for the moment, but this will certainly be refined and on all of the ARPA amounts. Of course, if we do not fully expense the grants that we've appropriated this year, we need to in fiscal 26. So you will see those amounts, or portions of them, I should say, potentially reappropriated in the 26 amounts. But at this point in time, we're going to remain optimistic that we can get done what we can and what we plan to do before the end of the fiscal year. So with that, our next steps, this is the beginning. We always have cautious optimism moving forward. The economy is still very, very strong, and certainly the local economy is. But I've been saying it now for years, uncertainty reigns. So we just have to keep that in mind. Departmental budget reviews will start at your next meeting on February 13th, and that will be public safety and administration, the departments under Eric. The February 20th meeting will be the departments under Christine, so finance and administration and governance. March 6th, keep in mind that's the first Thursday in March, we'll be doing community and economic development. We're moving that, of course, because spring break is right in the middle, so your second Thursday is not available. March 20th, then, we will come back and do public works, and I believe the conference center is scheduled for the 20th, and appropriations to outside agencies. And this would be a good, convenient time to say that those meetings will be
At Eastern Flank Park.
Oh.
This is our last meeting here in the boardroom, and we will be, our city recorder, I'm looking at her, but I believe all the meetings for the rest of this year, with the exception of May, we're looking for a location for May, but the rest of the year will, or the rest of our interim period, hopefully, will be at Eastern Flank Park Event Center.
So revised revenue projections will be presented as part of Eric's full submission in the month of May. Eric, Christine, Mr. Gaster, and myself are happy to stand for any questions that you may have on the revenue forecast.
I do want to make one note I should have made a little bit earlier. Tomorrow is Michael Walters Young's birthday. And there is, one of our most loyal viewers is Michelle Young from Lawrence, Kansas, Michael's mom, and I'm sure she's watching. Happy birthday, Michael.
Well,
Thank you. And I was born into an Iowa blizzard, so tomorrow, go in true to form.
Okay. So,
Well, Madam Chair, at this time, I do not have any questions other than everybody make their trip to Kroger for
point.
their necessities and have their sleds ready.
yes, very good point.
Be safe.
Okay. So we're ready to go to.
Thank you for the presentations.
Yes, thank you. Item 6.
Well, Madam Chair, I'll take item 6, which is the overview of the debt service fund for fiscal year '26. We started off this time together talking about issuing bonds, and we're going to talk about paying for bonds now. Primarily, we're going to be talking about, in this presentation, looking at the repayment of our general obligation bonds. We will hit on a little bit on water and wastewater debt. That debt is budgeted and accounted for separately within the water utility fund, but it's very important debt, and I never miss an opportunity to talk about water and sewer debt, so we added that to this presentation a couple of years ago. As of the most recent audit that you heard about at our December meeting, as of June 30th, 2024, our general obligation debt outstanding is just below $100 million. I will call it $99.5 million with a final maturity in 2039. I will take a moment to give just a little bit of context. The last time that we issued new money GO bonds, like I said, was in May of 2019. We closed that fiscal year on June 30th of 2019. At that time, our GO debt was at $154.8 million. During these 6 years, while we have been working on design for projects, living through momentous events, we have repaid $55.3 million of GO debt principal in those 6 years. So that accelerated amortization schedule has marched along and brought us to where we are just under $100 million as we get ready to issue up to $48 million over the next few months. So this was a couple years ago. We talked about the takeaway was that our GO debt was less than our water and sewer debt outstanding. We're getting ready to change on that, but I did want to share that with you as context. We do have outstanding $136 million of outstanding debt in our water and sewer fund. We did issue $130 million of debt for the wastewater treatment plant project. There actually was not too much debt in water and sewer utility until we expanded the plant. That was anticipated, but we, just as context, 91% of that project was debt funded. And so you'll see, as we've talked about with our water and sewer staff, just the constraints that issuing so much debt for a very large project can place on the financial operations of the system. But we have been repaying that debt steadily. We are now $136 million outstanding in the water and sewer fund. Now we are going back just to talk about our general obligation, our city debt. This, of course, as we heard earlier, this is our highest rated debt. It does carry 2 AAA ratings from long-term ratings from both Standard & Poor's and Moody's. We do have a debt policy that we every year we go back and we calculate ratios that are in our debt policy, and we disclose these also different metrics within our audit. Much of this factors is how much debt we have outstanding related to other metrics, our ability to repay from property taxes. As we've not issued debt and we've paid off debt as we go, these have become more and more favorable over the last 6 years, so these ratios have gone down. They are considerably lower than what our debt policy gives as a recommendation for each of these, which we would have expected, not issuing debt and paying off debt. For our water and sewer, We do have one long-term rating on water and sewer. It's a AA2 from Moody's. Of course, this was issued as a AA3 and was upgraded to AA2 a few years back, which certainly is helpful. We do have a revenue pledge in the water and sewer utility of a minimum of 1.25 times debt service as a percentage of net revenue available to repay debt. When we had very little debt on the utility, we had very high revenue coverage, which we would expect. And we were over 3 times until we began issuing debt for the plant. And we are now essentially very, very much close to what that limit is. And certainly that's something that we've talked about. Our water and sewer staff has given presentations to the board about that any increase in expenses to the water and sewer fund, whether it be increasing salaries, the cost to buy water to sell to our customers, those increases in expenses decreases the net revenue that's available to cover debt service. So we do have increasing debt service as the years have gone by, but then we also have increasing expenses in the utility as well. So both of those factors have played into the decrease in the debt service coverage. So, but that is a requirement to maintain debt service coverage of at least 1.25, and certainly I'd like to see higher than 1.25, so that one small anomaly in expenses doesn't take us to a place where we don't want to be. This is a foreshadowing of what is obligated in debt service for the general obligation schedule that we repay with property taxes, as Dylan was describing to us. We are at the highest point in the debt service curve. Alderman Peterson's heard us for many years talk about and show this curve, and we've been looking at fiscal year 26 and 27 for a long time, and they are now upon us. And certainly, while this looks at what an estimated debt service of the new bond issue will be and takes that into account, it's always been that 26 and 27 were going to be our high points. And then we would stair-step down very quickly. We actually have a couple of bond issues that are getting ready to have final repayment in the next fiscal year. So we're reaching a point where we'll be stair-stepping down. And certainly the front loading of the principal on this new bond issue just continues that trend of having stair steps down along the way. But for fiscal 26 and 27, those high points of what's already obligated to be repaid, if we didn't issue any more debt, we would still have $15 million of principal and interest. Most of it's principal because we have structured the debt in that way. But if we didn't issue any more debt, we would still need to repay $15 million. We're looking at close to $4 million that we're adding on in those 2 years if we issue the new debt, and of course front load that debt service in accordance with the projects that we have selected and their useful lives. So we will just add some more to the top of 26 and 27, and then we'll continue that stair step down. We do extend the amortization right now. We have a final amortization of 2039. If we didn't issue any more debt, we will now go out to 2045. We'll add 6 more years. 20 years from when the debt was issued in 2025 will get us to 2045. And we did have final amortization of 2039, 20 years from 2019. And this debt is all fixed rate. And with the exception of estimates for the 2025 bond issue, the rest of the debt service is all those interest payments are known. So looking at fiscal 26, we do have, this shows that there's a couple of other funds which do contribute to paying for debt service. Road Impact, I believe, has about 6 more years until it runs its course. Hotel Motel has selected projects for tourism related. Sanitation was part of the 17 and 19 bond issues. There were some improvements that had to be made at the sanitation facility that were done with the 17 and 19 bond issues, and and they have a small part, but it is primarily funded with the property taxes. And of course, the pledge is property taxes. If anything happened to any of these other sources of funds, the property tax would be required, as Lillian was saying, to pay the debt service. So with that, we went through it pretty quickly, but if you have any questions about debt service, we'd be glad to discuss that.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, then. So we're looking for item 7, hotel motel fund.
Let's talk hotels. As a reminder, the Hotel Motel Fund for the City of Franklin is a special revenue fund which accounts for our locally administered tax on occupancy of the over 30 hotels and motels in the City of Franklin. Your current rate is 4% of a nightly stay. You have a legal limit that could go as high as 5%. The fund primarily is used to pay debt service on tourism and parks-related projects. It was used to fund debt service in the Cool Springs Conference Center, as well as Battlefield Parks. We contribute 1% of our 4% to support the efforts and work of the Williamson County Convention and Visitors Bureau, of which I will highlight in just a moment. Overall performance for the last 10 years has been incredibly strong post-COVID. This was a fund that until COVID just had one line and one chart, and it did this. You see on the screen the impacts of 2020 and 2021. No fund was impacted by the pandemic more than this, because at one point in time, I believe it was April of 2020, revenues year over year were 90% lower. But it rebounded, and it rebounded incredibly strongly and incredibly well, and you can see the last 3 years are the highest that we have ever seen. Speaking of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, what I have on the next 2 screens are things that you see in your weekly updates about every month when they are able to get it out and Eric's able to send it to you. They do an incredible job tracking all of the data from all the hotels. So they look at occupancy rate, the annual daily rate being charged, the revenue available per room, the total supply, total demand, and then of rooms, and the revenue generated. As Dylan indicated in the revenue model presentation, you can see that year over year for the first 10 months, occupancy is slightly less. The revenue per room, supply, demand, and revenue is also slightly less. And we did see that in the first 3 months of budget compared to actuals, but it's only the first 3 months of our fiscal year. What it also shows on this screen is that you're still having an average daily rate of $155 per room in the county, and an occupancy rate of 74.3%. So it's still incredibly strong. And even if it's slightly down, there are no alarm bells going off in anyone's minds regarding tourism. As you saw, Maureen Thornton, Haley Thornton from the Convention Visitors Bureau, in the presentation she gave at one of your prior board meetings, the number of visitors and the contribution of tourists to the local economy is deeply impactful on all of our pockets. For fiscal 26, and this is going to be a continuation of a theme when I go to the next set of budgets, revenues are 6.7 million. Expenditures are only at 2.55 million. That includes only the fixed costs of debt service, that 1% contribution of the Convention or Visitors Bureau, and the second year of the commitment to update the city's preservation plan. That amount probably is going to change. Having talked with Emily, we had planned to do it about 50-50. Chances are we won't fully expense this year's appropriation, so it'll be higher in 26. But we would anticipate still by the end of fiscal 26 that update would be completed. What is going to be recurring in about 30 seconds when I go to the next set of budgets is this does not have any capital funding appropriated yet. Primarily because, once again, we're going to come to you with an update on the financials, and then we'll talk about what projects we want to take on for 26 and update those budgets in May.
Okay. So are we ready to move on to the development funds, number 8?
There are 4 funds included here. As you heard from Dylan, we are assuming on all the revenues for these funds, roughly 75 to 85% of the 5-year historical averages of collections. So That will save a little bit of time, but those development funds are the city facilities tax, the county facilities tax, the road impact fund, and the parkland dedication fund. The city facilities tax was created in 1987. It is a privilege tax on new development that provides that new development contribute its fair share to providing new public facilities made necessary by growth. There are two rules that centrally govern the use of these funds. They can only be used for police, fire, sanitation, and parks and recreation expenditures. And they can only be used on expenditures related to growth. Thus, new equipment and infrastructure facilities can be paid for out of these funds, but the replacement of existing equipment and operations personnel cannot. We're forecasting roughly $2.2 million in revenues. There are no expenses being forecast at this time. We will come back to you and update that. The county facilities tax. We began collecting our share in fiscal 2012. It is a portion of the county's adequate school facilities tax. Prior to fiscal 17, it was not a separate fund. Starting in fiscal 17, we segregated it out. Again, we're projecting roughly $881,000 in the county facilities tax. No expenses yet. We will come back and update. Historically, we have used these funds in conjunction with transportation-related improvements in and around county facilities, Franklin Special School District or Williamson County Schools. The Road Impact Fund was established also in 1988 via City Ordinance 88-13 on the proceeds of road impact fees from new development. We have recently completed and you have voted on an increase in a different set of rates for those fees. That increase is actually reflected in this budget, even though the forecast revenues are roughly 15% less. That is because, number one, we're keeping that 75 to 85% of averaging throughout for the last 5 years. Number two, remember, all of the scenarios we ran you assumed that the grandfathered projects would make up the majority, if not the totality, of collections in the first 2 years. And as it went out, those projects which would pay higher fees, which came in later, would start to make up increasing amounts of that pie. This projection assumes none of the new fees coming in yet. Expenditures, though, are actually more than the revenues which would come in. Those are in two truncheons. Number one is $3.9 million to service debt charged off to the Road Impact Fund, and $3 million, which is our standard set aside for road impact fee offset reimbursements for developers. So that way we always make sure we've got appropriations and can cut those checks if the developers are ready to be done with their projects and settle up with the city. And finally, the Parkland Dedication Fund was created in fiscal 2015 and is used for the acquisition or development of public parks, greenways, blueways, open space sites, or related facilities. We're forecasting roughly $1.1 million in revenues and nothing in expenses yet at this time, and we will plan that out with all of you as we get closer and closer to May. Madam Vice Chairman, that is all that we have on development funds.
Any comments, questions? Okay. Okay, so we're ready for the financial report, number 9, the financial report for the first quarter of fiscal year 2025.
Afternoon, Alderman Peterson, Alderman Potts. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things on the quarterly reports. As usual, first quarter is in a deficit, but that is because property tax is not booked until October 1st. So between debt service fund and general fund, you will see that deficit. Also, so you know, if you look at the detail, our salaries and wages are lower in FY24. That's because our first payroll was pushed back to FY23. So 23 had 6 payrolls and 24 has 5 payrolls. So that's just so you know what's going on with there.
Is there anything else you want to say? Okay. So, 10, are we ready to look at number 10, the monthly reports for January of 2025?
As always, local sales tax is holding steady. And we had an increase of $256,000 over this time last year for October sales tax. And all the other funds, or all the other revenues are doing well also. Hotel motel tax is down just a little bit, but conference center, we had a gain of $39,000 for the month of November for our
That's
profit.
interesting.
So.
Anybody want to say anything about any of the others?
I'll just mention that October sales tax was much more of a rate increase that we would have anticipated. The first 3 months of this fiscal year, we had the very high increases, and we had speculation, but certainly October of a 5% increase is more of something that we would have anticipated, while it's still strong. But I believe we were at 14% one of the first 3 months of the year, and our average, even with this 5% month, is still, I believe, over 9. So
Yes.
last time we were together, we were saying that when we were watching sales tax, we think we're going to come back to a more normal change, and that 5% looks more normal to us. So we'll just point that out.
Okay. Very, very interesting, though. Okay. Anything else to say? Okay, so does that mean that we have finished all the items? So I guess do you have a motion to adjourn?
And our next
You don't need to
meeting
wait
is February 6th, is that right?
13th.
13th, I'm sorry.
Yes.
All right,
Thank
so
you for
you'll
saying
have
that.
2 meetings per month in February and March as
February,
we're
March.
February and
powering
March.
through departmental presentations.
Okay, so,
And Madam Chair, since we do not have quorum, I would recommend that we adjourn.
We just leave.
thank you very much.